Welcome back to American Psychotherapy, the YouTube channel where we psychoanalyze that subset of the American populace who is standing silently by as American democracy collapses. Come with me on a bike ride today, hear what's on my mind, and hopefully you'll want to share this ride with somebody else and start up a conversation of your own. Let's go. In America today, we the people find ourselves in peaceful possession of the fairest piece of real estate on planet Earth, bounded by two oceans and two friendly neighbors. We find ourselves under the government of historically solid political institutions that guard civil and religious liberty more than in any other time or place in human history. And we, the people, find ourselves the inheritors of these liberties and the founding principles safeguarding them. We're not the Americans who conceived or established these liberties. These liberties and the operational template that protects them were a legacy bequeathed to us by a brave, patriotic, and wise set of predecessors. Theirs was the task to design and establish a political shelter for liberty and equal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We, the people, are only the partakers of all this liberty and equality, and the political levers protecting both. Our only task is to operate those levers as intended and pass along all of this to future Americans, unprofaned, undecayed, undesecrated. For the last 250 years, taking account of what we've been given, taking care of it, looking out for one another as Americans, and holding it together to pass it all along to our posterity it's been the magic formula. And it sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Especially for the most powerful, most affluent, most influential nation on the planet. How tough could it be? Just follow the operational plan. And don't fuck it up. American democracy aspires not to be a perfect union, but to be a more perfect union. In other words, it acknowledges that it will never be a perfect union. And those two realities stand in conflict with each other and in opposition to each other. But it is this tension that makes American democracy exceptional. If we, the people, cannot bring ourselves any longer to subjugate our own self-interest to the interests of others on occasion, we're done. And yet, this is the only formula that has permitted American democracy to endure as a great experiment for 250 years. Look, folks, the Constitution and the rule of law have been passed on to us. We're its trustees, not to enslave ourselves to the Constitution. Hell, the Constitution provides the template whereby we can amend, adapt, and evolve to changing times. The levers for adaptation are there. It's up to us to use them until we decide we don't want to or we can't anymore because it's just too damn hard. Back when America was still young, barely 50 years after American democracy had been put in place, there was a 28-year-old statesman in America who was quite eloquent and exceptionally insightful. After pointing out all of our liberties, the protections for those liberties, and our ability to maintain them with tools that had been given to us, and our duty to pass all this along, he posed a question. If all this is the case, at what point then is the approach of danger to be expected in America? And he answered, if danger ever reaches us, it must spring up amongst us. It can't come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we the people must ourselves be its author and its finisher. As a nation of the free, we the people must either live through all time or die by suicide. I'm going to circle back and talk more about who this leader is, who was speaking back in 1838. But before I do, I want to tell you about a second rhetorical question he posed. He said, how then should we fortify against this danger? Let every American pledge his life, he said, his property, and his sacred honor to the Constitution of the United States and to the rule of law. Let reverence for the Constitution be breathed by every American. Let it be taught in our schools, in our seminaries, and our colleges. Let it be written in the primers and spelling books and the almanacs. Let it be preached from the pulpits, proclaimed in our legislative halls, and enforced in our courts. In short, let our Constitution and the rule of law become our political religion in America. The American who uttered these sentiments was none other than Abraham Lincoln back in 1838. At the time, he was only 28 years old, but he was old enough to foresee the Civil War on America's horizon. 23 years later, he would be called upon to preside over it. And he'd lead America through that war to a broken, bloodied, but reunited States of America. Abraham Lincoln lived this American political religion that he proclaimed back in 1838, and he died its martyr in 1865. Look, Abraham Lincoln's 1838 speech I've been drawing from is commonly known as the Lyceum Address, but Lincoln himself entitled his remarks "The Perpetuation of Our Political Institutions." Many of those political institutions are referred to directly or indirectly right in the U.S. Constitution, the document which enumerates, fractures, and separates powers granted to the government by consent of the governed, and it specifies the manner by which those powers are to be checked and balanced. Folks, if American democracy is to survive, the U.S. Constitution and the rule of law and the political institutions that uphold it must become and always be America's political religion. Lincoln's reference to what should be America's political religion is a curious choice of words to me, but I'll circle back to that. If the Declaration of Independence is to be believed, America's origin story is framed around the central idea that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with equal and unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It says so right there in the first sentence of the second paragraph. But is that really America's origin story? After all, the very men who penned those words bought and sold and profited from the forced labor of African slaves. And those same men, America's founding fathers, had every intention all along to forcibly expropriate land from Native Americans who possessed those lands long before any white colonists showed up on the shores of the New World. Was America really founded and forged on the premise that all human beings were created equal? Or was that just hyperbolic subtext calculated to shake ourselves loose from a tyrant king over in England? There are those in America today that believe that America's actual origin story is one of divine favor for white Christian slave owners for whom God had prepared and ordained this promised land. These folks see their origin story as one of God's manifest destiny for them and their nation. Ask a proud white Christian nationalist today to tell you about America's origin story. Ask a MAGA-supporting Christian, evangelical, or Mormon. They'll all tell you that God's favor and hallowed hand over America is the true origin story because of their Christian beliefs. And they won't tell you that they have faith in that perspective. They won't profess a mere belief in that perspective. Oh no, they will testify to you that that is the actual American origin story because God's witnessed it to them. And after they witness to you America's true origin story, hang out with these folks a while and just listen to them exchange talking points from Fox News, conservative talk radio, and GOP spokespersons. And listen carefully to what you're not hearing. Deafening silence with regard to any number of other people, Palestinians in Gaza. Silence with regard to the terrors visited upon legal and illegal immigrants alike on the streets of America. Silence with regard to the widespread denial of due process. With regard to detention camps like Alligator Alcatraz. The separation of black and brown immigrant families and the deportations of persons uncharged and unconvicted of any crime to deplorable conditions in countries they've never even been to. These folks have nothing to say about any of that because they don't care. Hang around and hear their silence in response to the dismantling of USAID, the CDC, and racial discrimination protections that have been in place for 50 years in America. Hear the silence of these folks with response to dead Americans shot for protesting ICE on the streets of America. Silence in response to the absence of any investigations or accountability for the lives that have been snuffed out. And silence for the obvious misinformation disseminated by government officials in connection with those killings. Folks who stand silent as all this is unfolding around them, who still support MAGA and Donald Trump, they don't give a shit about anybody's rights but their own. America's origin story, in their mind, is not about all of us in America. It's about us versus them, whoever they are. And that fucked up view of America and Americans is wrapped around the axle of their faith in God and their imagined idea of how God views them. Can we all just pause for a moment to compare this so-called religion proclaimed in 2026 in the name of Jesus by MAGA loyalists with the political religion urged by Abraham Lincoln in 1838? They are two polar opposite interpretations of how the term religion is defined. In his 2024 commencement address at Brandeis, Ken Burns shared a treasure trove of sobering and timely and uplifting observations. You should find that address. You should listen to that address. You should share it and discuss it with the people you care about in your life. I won't bother to try to review any of it, but 3 simple points that he made in connection with faith and by extension with religion. He made 3 points, and here they are. The opposite of faith is not doubt. Doubt is central to faith. The opposite of faith is certainty. Let the Constitution and the rule of law be America's political religion, Lincoln said. And who penned America's founding documents and principles? I'll tell you who. Not men who lied about themselves or what they wanted for America. They were men who wrote their political, personal, and collective aspirations. Aspirations which exceeded the evidence to be found in their own flawed lives. What they wrote was not a lie. What they wrote was a political, personal, and collective national plea, a petition, a prayer to their better angels. What they conceived and set in motion all those years ago was at the same time a confession of inadequacy and a faithful pledge to become better men and better Americans to their fellow citizens. The Constitution is a written political confession of its own inadequacy. It acknowledges the reality that it was incomplete, that amendments would be inevitable, and it outlined the method for future changes. That document solemnly charges all of us today to relentlessly pursue a more perfect union as Americans. Folks, just as Lincoln warned in the Lyceum Address, America and American democracy are under attack today from within, at the hands of folks who just don't give a shit about anybody's rights but their own. From folks who nourish themselves with a steady diet of anger and hatred for other people. People they perceive as punking them, persecuting them, and threatening their traditional cultural dominance. If you can't be bothered to pick up a copy of the Constitution and read its 30 or so pages, if you can't be bothered to highlight a few things, take a few notes, and discuss its intended operation, you don't deserve American democracy anymore. Please, don't be an American ignorant of and disinterested with American democracy's operation, mankind's greatest political experiment. Learn about it, love it, live it, make it America's political religion, as Lincoln suggested. Thanks for coming along. If you enjoyed this ride, share this episode with somebody else and begin a conversation of your own. Happy Independence Day, everybody.